negative team are really, really confused with today's debate. There are two distinct things which we support in the same case. The first is general anti-avoidance provisions. These provisions already exist in the tax laws of most nations. The second is moving the interpretation of those provisions from the courts initially to the tax office. All of their rule of law arguments about retrospectively invalidating your tax returns and stuff like that are an argument against the anti-avoidance provisions. Here's the thing, we desperately need the anti-avoidance provisions. Why? Because the tax law is really fucking complicated, right? They were like, look, it's just so complicated, it's thousands of pages, there's so many contradictions that if we apply the letter of the law, no one would ever pay their tax if they could pay their accountants to get away with it, right? We support those provisions, but we say those provisions can only operate effectively. We say that if what they oppose is, in addition to moving the interpretation to the tax department, they oppose all general anti-avoidance provisions, under even what they're saying, the tax system totally breaks down. Right, 3 questions in this debate. The first is the tax system failing at the moment in terms of the interpretation and who applies the law? The second of all, does this breach the rule of law? And the third is, what happens under our system? Right. So the first thing is, this debate is not about corporations who are being honest. It's not about corporations who are genuinely trying to follow the law, who are cooperating with lawyers, who aren't trying to break the law, who are cooperating, most importantly, with the IRD. Who, by the way, you can work with if you're confused about these sort of tax issues and you want to make an honest system, right? This is about the fact that companies like Goldman Sachs, companies like Facebook, massive multinational corporations who operate in large sections of the global economy at the moment are systematically robbing governments out of billions of dollars of tax revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2005, Goldman Sachs paid $6 billion worth of tax within the United States. By 2008, that was $200 million. We think that is outrageous. We think they are using international and national tax loopholes to rot the system, and we think the IRD is falling behind. Right, so why are our tax systems falling behind in terms of how we collect taxes? We gave you a whole lot of mechanisms why that is, and we think that our model solves them to some extent. The first is that we think these people have the best lawyers and the best knowledge in terms of how the legal system works. That's because while the IRD, and the tax collectors have some legal departments and they have good lawyers, they can, the horizontal pay structures mean they can't afford the best people, the people who really know this sorts of stuff in this area. What does that mean? It means that they can exploit every single tax loophole and they can drag us through the court process. Why does that matter? It's because the IRD doesn't necessarily have the power to take everyone to court, right? But what they would have is the power to simply, look at what they're doing, say that's illegal, and force the owners to take them to court on the other person, right? We think, furthermore, statutes of limitations are relevant here. Because what happens is the tax man will take like a case which is meant to be used to set a precedent. But what will happen is the entire tax industry gets behind the defendants in that case. They try to run out the clock to ensure that anything which would be covered by the precedent that would be set in that case is no longer going to be covered because the statute of limitations ensures that that is bunk and you don't get that sort of tax. The second problem, and this is where we didn't really have any response, was in terms of informational issues. Because under a burden of proof which the tax system has to satisfy, you need that sort of information, but you simply can't get it due to quirks in the international law system in many cases, right? We told you that many of these companies register shell companies in multiple different countries. And Bermuda's not going to give up this information, right? Bermuda's whole economy is taking massive tax deposits and earning interest on them to ensure that these people can dodge their taxes. They're not going to give up information to the tax man because their whole industry is bunked when they do that, right? What we say is that we reverse the burden of proof. We make you prove that you're not avoiding tax, so you have to take that information to court, right? You simply don't have a choice. What we do is we say the delays are no longer actually going to benefit you, right? Because under our system, you actually have to win the case to get your money back, right? You can't. It's not enough to simply delay. And so we only get people taking their cases to court where they genuinely haven't breached the tax law, right? We think that's a good thing. Second of all, in terms of the rule of law in this case, right? I've already dealt with the fact that they're fundamentally confused between the operation of general anti-avoidance provisions and of our system. But let's deal with some of the other potential requirements. The first thing is we are fine with taking this quasi-judicial function into an executive body, right? Why is that? First of all, we think executive bodies make quasi-judicial judgments about how they should apply the law all the time. In the healthcare system, for example, a hospital might be required legally to provide some sort of healthcare to some sort of people. but then they might be judicially reviewable if they don't fulfill that function. This is essentially saying we are simply going to shift. We are going to pass a law in Parliament which shifts that decision-making process from one body to another. We don't think that undermines the rule of law, because that body is still accountable to the courts, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's fine. But the second and more important thing here is the rule of law is not just something that applies to the state. It should not just be a concept where we say the state is accountable for everything they do, and massive corporations who are significant actors within the global economy at the moment are not accountable for that system. We can do nothing while they massively brought us. They brought billions of dollars from our system, ladies and gentlemen. That's the real rule of law outrage. That everyone in this room, I don't know if anyone here is incredibly wealthy or associated with Goldman Sachs or anything like that, pays their tax, right? But the massive corporation, people who are in, seven-figure paychecks are not doing that. That's the real problem in this debate. Right. The final question is in terms of what happens under our model, because they pointed to a number of adverse outcomes which we just don't think are true. The first thing they said was, look, companies just aren't going to disclose certain types of information. This is like a, show your working point, right? We never heard in particular what types of information they weren't going to disclose, which they weren't already required to disclose. Is it going to be, their average return on investment? Is it going to be their revenue? Is it going to be, their expenses, their capital operating expenditure? We never heard what sort of information they might not and do not want to disclose in order to sort of rort the system, right? We think at the moment it's pretty clear what you have to disclose in an annual report at your AGM, and we think generally companies will use that as a guide as to what they want to put in those annual reports, right? If the problem is that companies aren't disclosing certain pieces of information which we would like them to disclose, change the law and make them disclose that sort of information. But the second thing is that they see that they were going to be less willing to disclose that sort of information to the IRD. The problem is at the moment they don't, right? And that's because they don't want to pay their tax. The IRD under our model has the power to say, right, give us the information, tell us what we want to know so we can make a genuine assessment of whether or not you're paying tax, or we're simply going to say that you're not, right? Under their model, the IRD has no power to do that. So the IRD gets better information from these people under our model, right? We think most people who genuinely do want to cooperate are worked out under our system because you just work with the IRD. The second thing was in terms of how parliamentary law reform works, right? The problem at the moment is that there is massive lobbying power from corporations in order to put loopholes into our tax laws, right? They can then exploit those loopholes. You buy a congressman, you get them to say, oh, I will, I will vote for this particular bill if you attach this provision which undermines the tax law. And it might be like the Flag for Orphans bill, right? But that's just how it works. You get these random sort of changes through in countries like the States. What we say is you give the taxman the power to fight back, right? Because the only way to fight this sort of corruption is to give the taxman more power. You can't just say these companies are so powerful they can rule the legal system and say we shouldn't do anything about that. For all these reasons, we're very proud to propose.